Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start straight off with Senator Flake and him saying potentially that the president could face a primary challenger in 2020. Do you agree?
Well, sure, the president could face a primary challenger. Any Republican running for office can face a primary challenger, so nobody should be shocked about that. They're trying to challenge Jeff Flake.
He's saying he's inviting
in
one. That's a little bit different.
For whom? For Jeff Flake or for the president?
The president is inviting a primary challenger.
Well, look, I think there's that potential. I think it's a little early because most of us in Congress right now are focused on 2018 and this cycle. Most of us, to be candid, Katie, are not looking at 2020. I know some are, but if you're asking if there could be a primary in 2020 at the presidential level, the answer is, of course, there could be. But right now, it's all about 2018 for most of us.
Congressman, isn't it interesting, though, that your immediate answer is not, no, of course not. He's going to be president in 2020. He's going to get reelected. If you ask any Democrat that in 2004, they would have said, or 2008, excuse me, they would have said, absolutely, President Obama is going to be the candidate again, and he's going to win.
Well, that's correct. Well, this has been a very unusual presidency, to be sure, because we've had a very tumultuous several months. And I know there are a lot of us are concerned about the sustainability of this situation, given that what we've been going through over the last few months. No question about it.
Talking about a government shutdown, if either fund the wall or shut down the government, as the president is suggesting, is it a fight that you're going to be willing to have with the president?
Shutting down the government at this point would be an act of political malpractice. The border funding, we have border security funding in the appropriations bill passed out of the House in July. The time to have that debate about border funding will be in December when we deal with the omnibus appropriations bill, not in September with this 75-day continuing resolution to fund the government. It's a terrible mistake.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and also, and by the way, we're not going to default on our obligations either. That would be a catastrophic event to default. Undermining the full faith and credit of the country would undermine us as a reserve currency. That is simply not going to happen. But shutting the government down, though, is simply, it's a fool's errand to think that it would be in anyone's interest to do that.
So respectfully, what do House Republicans do? Do they just reject the president?
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will pass a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. We'll also pass a debt ceiling. I would recommend we put the two issues together. And, if we really get ambitious here, we can pass a bipartisan, bicameral budget agreement, put it all together. These things will all require bipartisan collaboration, by the way. That's inevitable. Put them together. And if we can't get an agreement on those items, then we will just have to pass the debt ceiling cleanly. And that's what the Treasury Secretary has asked for, Mnuchin. And we've also could pass a clean continuing resolution. Bottom line is there are plenty of options for us to advance both the funding of the government and the debt ceiling. This shouldn't be that hard, but as you know how Congress is, we can make things awfully dramatic when we don't need to. This is straightforward stuff. This is a basic fundamental act of governance, and we have to get this thing done, and we have to do it right.
That's an understatement, making it complicated. A lot of folks in Congress on the Republican side have been questioning the president's judgment on a number of issues. They've questioned his response on a number of issues as well, not to mention a number of his tweets. At what point does questioning the character or not having faith in the character of the president trump trying to get the Republican agenda done?
Well, I think it's fair to say that most of my colleagues in the House and I suspect the Senate are more than a bit frustrated and frankly exhausted with, being forced to respond to the tweet of the moment, whether it's going after Jeff Flake or John McCain or Ken Frazier from Merck or whatever. That when the president, makes those statements or issues those tweets, it drives the whole media narrative, and that's what we talk about. I wish the president would use his Twitter account to say, talk about the tax code being 70,000 pages long, or why we need to do infrastructure in 140 characters. That would be nice. That would be helpful. That would drive the media narrative on on agenda items that we agree with the president need to be dealt with.
What do you make of the president saying today that it's just his change in tone that is working for him? Specifically seeing a different tone from one day to the next. The speech he gave the other day that was broadcast nationally about Afghanistan, then the Arizona rally, and then the speech in front of the American Legion. They were all rather different. The president tweeted about them today, saying one was somber and then Phoenix was fun. Do you think that's appropriate, the president, quote unquote, changing tones?
Well, I think when you're president and you really can't shift tones so easily. What he did on Afghanistan, I thought, was a very measured, thoughtful statement. And I think the policy was pretty good. Then I thought Arizona, I didn't think that was particularly fun or funny. I didn't think that was very as presidential as it should have been. And then he gave the speech yesterday. So I guess the president, when he speaks, he's speaking to everyone all the time. It's pretty hard to narrowcast as a president. Every time he speaks, everybody hears what he says, and different audiences, interpret those events differently. And I think that's something that the president, needs to understand, that it's hard for him to narrowcast this stuff out there. Everybody hears everything he says, and I think sometimes it creates a certain level of uncertainty for our friends and allies, because they're not always sure exactly where he is. I was in Germany recently, and they're concerned about how to interpret what it is the president is saying. And I've heard the term used over there, strategic patience, to deal with the president, of all things. So that's something I just think that the president should be concerned about. His words have meaning, and different people interpret them in different ways.
On this topic, I want to squeeze one more question in very quickly. Who do other countries listen to? Do they listen to the president, or do they listen to the State Department? Are they being told behind the scenes to ignore the president and just listen to Rex Tillerson?
Well, I can't say what people are being. I can't tell you what people are being told, but I am concerned that on issues, for example, like trade and NATO, I had some difference of opinion with the president on those two issues, and I think many of the president's staff, particularly the national security team and Tillerson, have more traditional, conventional views of American leadership in Europe on NATO and as it relates to opening markets through trade. And I think there's been, and also the vice president, I should include in that category too. And so we often know the president may say one thing and to be contradicted by his staff at other times. It is challenging, and I think our friends overseas, are a bit confused by this, and they're befuddled by it, and they want to understand what the American position is. I relay to them that I believe that the United States will continue to play its traditional role in the world, and we will honor our obligations. But there's uncertainty because of these conflicting statements that we've been hearing between the president and some of his senior staff.
Congressman Charlie Dent, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.